You're well over a quorum. Great. So are we recording?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I know folks will be jumping in as we get going. Unfortunately, Maya, our chair, is unable to be here this evening. So bear with me as I fulfill my duties as vice chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force. So I will call the meeting to order. It's 7:02. I just wanted to quickly, before we jump further into the agenda, just remind everybody that this is a public meeting. It's so great to see so many members of the public here tonight. So thank you for being here. The Anti-Racism Task Force does have 11 members. I believe Gina is adding ARTF after the members of the task force. So whenever we're calling for a vote, it'll just be those 11 people who are able to be counted for that vote. Just want to make sure we're clear on that. And there has been, I'm guessing everybody's seen the agenda since you're all here, which is wonderful. We are operating under Robert's Rules of Order, and we're operating under the Open Meetings Act. So we can only talk about the things that the public knows is happening, and that's the things that are on the agenda. So unfortunately, if there's anything that's not on this agenda, we are not able to talk about that tonight. But we can hopefully put that on a future agenda and make sure we cover that. So we'll be keeping to that, and I'll be trying to do my job in that tonight. I also wanted to just remind folks that when the Chariho Regional School District School Committee created the Anti-Racism Task Force, our goal, we are not enacting changes as the Anti-Racism Task Force. What we're doing is crafting recommendations that are well thought out through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for the school district. So we'll be talking a little bit more about what that means, but ultimately our task force is going to be providing recommendations to the school committee for them to decide what kind of happens next with that. And then the last thing I'll just note is towards the end of the meeting, we will have members ask for potential items to be added to our next agenda, and our next agenda will be in for our meeting in May. Just note that that goes through a review process just to make sure that we are staying in line with our Open Meetings Act, so that Gina will look through that, as well as legal counsel, to make sure that it complies with the Open Meetings Act. So even just because we say and ask for it to be in a meeting, you may not see that because it goes through that process. So with that said, I will jump right into item 2 on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from our March 3rd, 2021 meeting. So for any of our Anti-Racism Task Force members, I will see if there's a motion.
I would move that we approve the minutes.
We have a second. I see Heidi raised her hand. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Looks like everybody. Any abstentions? Any opposed? Wonderful, great, thank you. And then the item number 3 is the review and discussion of the Open Meetings Act. So I believe, am I handing that over to you, Gina?
Not me, but I just texted our legal counsel, John Anderson, was going to do that one. And I don't see him. I just texted him, and I know Chief Johnson's coming for the next section with Mr. Hoffman, who's here from the Attorney General's office. So I'm wondering if the leader of the task force, maybe while we're waiting, if we could make a motion to move to item 5 and then jump back once John Anderson jumps in. How does that sound, Dan?
Sure, I think that's fine. Is there a motion?
I would move that we move to item 5.
Okay, thank you, Joe. A second? I see Katie's hand. All those in favor?
Aye.
See all the hands. Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, great. So moving on to number 5 is our school committee liaison report. So I'm going to hand that over to Lisa Macaruso, our liaison from the school committee, to specifically give an update about students and staff demographics. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I see that we have students on with us this evening. So welcome to all of you. So we wanted to put demographics on the agenda. We're doing it this evening and we're doing it at the school committee as well, just to help set the frame for the work that we're doing and bring some data to the conversation and some context. And so these numbers are from HR. And they were provided to me in July as I was forming this task force, and Superintendent Picard confirmed that they are still the accurate numbers. So in Charahoe, we have 3,164 students in total. Of those 3,164 students, 402 students have identified as being BIPOC, which means either Black, Indigenous, or students of color. So 402 out of 3,164. We have 480 combined professional teachers and teacher assistants. Of the 480 professional staff and TAs, we have one teacher who identifies as a BIPOC teacher or person of color, and we have one TA. That concludes my report.
Getting off unmute here. Thank you, Lisa. I think that's really helpful for us to move forward. And I know when we reported out at the school committee meeting last month, that was a question. So I think that's really helpful for as we're moving forward to understand. Great. Are there, from any of the task force members, is there any questions for Lisa about that report? Oop, and I see Carla coming in too. Do we need to vote to approve the, oh, Heidi?
I'm wondering if the numbers about staff are accurate, since I personally know of more than those. I wonder if people didn't fill things out for certain reasons. I'm just thinking, I know of more staff members than one. And I'm wondering if maybe some people just have not actually put that into their demographics.
It would be based on how they identified, but I can ask Christian, we can always follow up when we ask for people to revise their information.
Katie, I see your hand up.
I was just wondering, to go off of Heidi's point, I'm wondering what the choices were for selecting, because sometimes is there not a choice for choose not to identify? And if that may be what we're seeing reflected in the data.
I can follow up.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Lisa? Oh, there you go.
Thanks. I wanted to let you know that I couldn't unmute. Both of those are good questions. I think both of those questions at a future time could be discussed, and those questions and answers probably inform our work as well. However, I also would ask us always to pause and really think, do we really know what we think we know? Because we can assume someone's racial identity or not. We can assume that they are something or they're not, and maybe they've shared, but it is how an individual discloses is right how we should move forward. So I would just add that as well. But any of those points I think are worthwhile discussion and exploration for another time, certainly.
For sure, thank you. Jess.
I just wanted to ask Lisa to repeat the number of students who identified as BIPOC. I just want to make sure that I captured that.
I'm glad to. Hold on one moment. Okay, so that's 402 students of 3,164.
Thanks.
Yes, you're welcome. And the staff, you had that already, so that was 2.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Do we don't need to vote to approve that report? No. Okay. Just testing you. Okay. So I haven't seen, do we have Chief, or do we have John for us to move back to item 2?
Not yet. So we may,
Or should we
the task force is willing, we could move to item 6.
And since we're moving sequentially, do we need to make a vote on that?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Joe, thank you. Oh, or Thon, thank you. All those in favor? Great. Any opposed?
Aye. No, I'm not opposed. I'm in favor. Sorry.
Little delay there. No worry. Thank you, Thon. And any abstentions? I don't see anybody left. Great. Okay, so moving on to number 6 is debriefing and next steps for policies in the practices work groups. So just a little recap. The policies committee reported out to the school committee at the March, I'm delaying as I'm looking at my calendar, at the March 9th meeting. Is that correct? Yes. We provided a report out from the policy work group, basically going over what the kind of thought trajectories are from that group. And then the practices work group did so at the March 23rd meeting, and the curriculum one will be coming in future months. So I'm happy I see Indonis and Joe on. I know Dartula wasn't able to make it tonight, but I'm happy to do a quick recap of kind of what I report out, and then feel free, Joe or Indonis, to jump in. So for the policies working group of the Anti-Racism Task Force, we presented about our current tiered recommendations, kind of the initial formation of those. So just for a quick recap for anybody who hasn't been in our last meetings, tier 1 is the recommendation and creation of a diversity statement and discrimination policy. Tier 2 is around the student handbook and recommendations to look at that through an anti-racism lens. To ensure clear, proactive, and responsive efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then tier 3 would be to write and recommend a policy ensuring ongoing professional development related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for all faculty, staff, and administration. So this was the first report out from the Anti-Racism Task Force working groups. So there was a decent amount of conversation from the school committee. I'm just going to focus on that was feedback specifically to our report out. So in my notes, probably one of the biggest thing, which I think it's really helpful. I think this was our intention, but it didn't translate that way. So a school committee member asked us to be intentional about, rather than crafting a discrimination policy, it should be an anti-discrimination policy, which I think makes a lot of sense. That they also really appreciated that we had the tiered format, looking at, and I know each of our working groups has operated under that structure, kind of thinking of the less resource heavy things that we can really move forward with, or the school committee could choose to move forward with. And then kind of as you go up on those tiers, the things that maybe would take a little more time, resources, and kind of thought to make those happen. So I think that's helpful for us to know as we craft those final recommendations, that we should keep that in that tiered format. School committee members asked us to continue to make sure, as we're finishing these recommendations, that we remain data driven and operate through the lens, looking at this work through the lens of our learners, which I think is important. And then they also encourage us to look into an accessible place for common definitions to be shared and viewed by the public. So I know that was something that was brought up at our last meeting, and that is on our agenda tonight to talk about those definitions. That way, as we're talking about these different topics, that our community understands kind of we're all operating off of shared definitions. So that was the feedback that I wrote down. And as far as the next steps, our working group did meet after that, just to kind of debrief. And we talked about and are starting to work on our next steps, which is crafting a recommended draft anti-discrimination policy and a diversity statement, so that when we send this recommendation to the school committee, they have what it could look like there for them to discuss. Then crafting the recommendations for a process for potential revisions to that handbook. And then for us to make sure we work with the school to catalog and better understand what professional development efforts have happened related to these topics. And then for us to take that information and draft recommendations on what that may look like for an ongoing comprehensive professional development program related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So Indonis or Joe, anything to add there for the
I would say the one thing I would add is just to say that these are going to be, strictly drafts, and we'll bring them back to the main committee to review, and then we would push them forward to Gina and Lisa for further review before finalization of whatever we're going to make as a recommendation goes on to the school committee. The other piece is always remember, as we have these discussions, when we do get those recommendations and drafts built, we encourage anybody that's part of the meeting, whether you're community or part of the committee, to share your thoughts at that point in time. Nothing should be a surprise for anybody once these are moved forward to the school committee as recommendations. So it takes everybody giving input, sharing their kind of high level view and their feelings and things like that, because that's what helps make us a solid policy at that point moving forward.
Absolutely.
I'll reiterate what you both already have said, that we understand that the sustainability of these recommendations and their long-term implications in the community really rely on focusing on the practice of actually having constant review and discussion from the school committee and from the public, and that these are not sustainable if the logic is not explained in a way that is accessible for everyone. So we have an emphasis on that. We also understand that these are difficult. This is difficult work. And so there's going to be tiers that are easily doable tomorrow. And there's going to be tiers that will require multi-generational investment. And many of our tiers in across all of the subcommittees are really looking at the harder work as one that is the most meaningful for everybody.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I see, Gina, you have your hand up.
I wanted to make one clarification, Dan, from the school committee meeting. The graduation policy dress, that's not actually a policy, not a practice. So it was mentioned at the practice feedback, but it's actually in the policy realm. So I just maybe just to clarify for the group.
Okay, that's really helpful. I know I sit on both of those committees, and I think there's so much of this work that even one of the practices recommendations relates a little bit to curriculum. There's so many, each topic maybe has a little bit of lens from each one, but that's really helpful. So I think as we look at what is written in stone and what is actually being done, that may be the differences between policies and practices, but that's really helpful. Thank you. And I know I don't want to look into Joe and Indonis to make sure I'm not over speaking here, but I know when we last met, we're hoping that we can really work between now and our next meeting so that at our next report out next month, that we have that first draft of a little bit closer to that final recommendations, to Indonis and Joe's point that the whole point here is to get the community feedback. So we're hoping that our next report out could really garner the input from folks on the call today. So excited to be there. Before we move on to the practices report out, is there any from any task force members, any questions on the policy report out? Don't see any hands. Okay, so for the practices group, they did a report out to the school committee on March 23rd. And I see Katie and Carla and Thon, so our whole group is on. I'm happy to do a quick run through, but feel free to jump in at any time. Our recommendations from the practices work group were they're a little longer than the policy ones, but tier 1 was continue to make school committee meetings accessible through virtual access. Right now as a task force, that kind of implies a short term. So we're looking at making a recommendation that a permanent subcommittee of the school committee is created, dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And then Gina just mentioned, one of the things we talked about were kind of the student-facing practices, one of which was allowing students to represent their cultures during graduation. So it's good to know that's more of a policy, so we'll make sure that that change happens. Classroom-based practices, things like and we talked about, I believe, Charleston Elementary School has actually done this really well, but rather than, when we're looking at classroom selections, rather than separating out all of our students of color, where our students of color end up being a little more isolated, ensuring that, we're being more intentional about that student grouping. So that's something that, worked well in some of our schools. So looking at formalizing in recognizing that work that's happened. In tier 2, we talked about reviewing, again, that data-driven piece, reviewing discipline practices and considering policy and handbook revisions based on what we find. We then talked about ensuring equitable guidance for all students. So making sure that our guidance staff, our guidance office is equipped with adequate resources and professional development so that they're best able to serve a truly diverse student body. And then create a process for external feedback on curricula. So not as a practice group, they were not recommending any changes to curricula, but thinking through the lens of what happens when a community member or a student has concern or feedback on curricula. Is there a process? What happens with that? So the idea would be to have kind of feedback forms at the elementary, middle, and high school level that would have a cataloging kind of feature. That way, there's already a robust process that the school uses to review curricula. But now when that committee's put together, they would have this basically, if any feedback came from the community or students or educators about curricula, that they would have that. And then finally, tier 3, great, and I see Elwood, Chief Johnson coming in now. And then for tier 3 would be consider ways to actively recruit and retain a more diverse staff. So the goal there, and I think this talks directly to what Lisa mentioned, and that was the kind of goal or recommendation there would be to better align our staff demographics with that of our student body. So again, Lisa mentioned that, out of our 3,000 plus students, we have about 400 self-identifying as BIPOC, and out of our 480 educators, we have about 2 self-identifying as BIPOC. So that ratio there is a little off. So looking at what recommendations can be made for that to be done in a more intentional way. And then considering ways to strengthen relationships between the district and the Narragansett tribe. In the past, there's been a tribal liaison role. So looking into ways that, we have some really great relationships with and institutionalized relationships with our 3 towns, Charlestown, Richmond, and Hopkinton. But the Narragansett tribe is a federally recognized tribe with its own governmental system. So looking at what, knowing that we're right on that land, how can we strengthen and formalize maybe that relationship. So some of the feedback that the school committee gave to the practices group, what I wrote down was overly really supportive of the direction that this working group was going. Some felt that some of these items were kind of no-brainers, again, liking the tiered structure, and then some of the other ones took a lot more thought and effort and resources to put together. That was kind of the main feedback that I have related to that. So I don't know if Katie or Carla or Thon, if there's anything I missed or anything you want to add.
For me, I think you pretty much covered everything, as well as like kind of the receptiveness that we were getting. So I don't have anything new to add. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Thon. Anything else? All right, Lisa, yeah.
I'll try to put that down. So I want to thank Superintendent Picard and the school committee chair, Linda Lyle. They have actually already made arrangements for the graduation attire to be on a future agenda item for discussion for policy revision prior to this year's graduation. So already, as you've expressed, that there are some things that you've brought forward and brought to the attention of the school committee that can be looked at and revised for the inclusion and the celebration of the diversity that we do have within our student body immediately. And so I thank Superintendent Picard and the chair for doing that. Gina can probably let us know what meeting that will be for those students. And I see you again, I see you here. If you want to join and talk about graduation attire and how important that may be to you, we'd love to hear your voices as well. So anyway, thank you. And I wanted to let the task force know that has happened, or it will be happening.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think that's really helpful. To that point, I think, I know we kind of mentioned it informally with this report out just now, but I think generally, and I see we have several school committee members on this call tonight. I thank you for being here. But I do think they were, really receptive and appreciative and understanding the amount of work that goes into that everybody here is taking to move this forward. So I appreciate that. Any other questions regarding the practices?
My only suggestion would be, to focus on the first school committee meeting in case there are revisions, that there's time if the goal is this graduation.
Gotcha. Great. Oh, Lisa, were you?
Yeah, I couldn't unmute again. Can the school committee members that are here just put your hands up? Because I think it would be nice for the kids and for the public to see those of you that are here, because we don't have your names listed. So, okay, so Donna Chambers is here and Linda McAllister. And let me check screen two. Okay. Anyway, I want everyone to see who they were so you know who your representatives are. And thank you for being here tonight.
Sure. Well, wonderful. If I'm not seeing any other questions related to the practices work group report out, and we just finished the policy one. So if we're none there, I see we have Chief Johnson from the Richmond Police Department. Welcome. And Keith Hoffman from the Attorney General. So we can move to back there. Gina, do we need to take a vote to move back there? Better safe than sorry. Yeah. So can I have a motion? Thank you, Joe. Can I have a second? I see Jess's hand. And all those in favor for moving to item 3?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstained? Wonderful. Motion carries. So we're going to go to item 4, reporting concerns of safety, cyberstalking, and cyber harassment with the input from Attorney General's office and the Richmond Chief of Police. So I will turn it over to Chief Elwood Johnson and Keith Hoffman.
So I was gonna-
Keith, can you unmute now? Just double check. Okay.
Yep, I'm unmuted. Thank you.
So Keith wore the jacket and I wore the tie. It's a perfect combination.
Together we're well dressed.
You've been on the meeting longer, Keith. You go right ahead, and then I'll follow you.
Okay, sure. Well, thank you all so much for having us here tonight. My name is Keith Hoffman. I'm the civil rights advocate in the Attorney General's office, and I'm a part of the AG's civil rights team. We're charged with prosecuting hate crimes and civil rights violations in the state. We've really prioritized this work under Attorney General Noronha. I can certainly talk, a little bit more about that if people would like to hear. But one of the things I'm most excited about lately has been our partnership with local police departments in this area. We've working with our police departments, we've set up a system where all the police departments have a hate crimes and civil rights liaison officer who is charged with helping to investigate hate crimes and civil rights issues, and then coordinating with our office to make sure that they're appropriately prosecuted. And actually, Chief Johnson is the hate crime and civil rights liaison in Richmond. So really, really good to be here tonight to talk a little bit about these issues. I think that, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have, but I thought that what I would do is just briefly talk about the AG's complaint procedure. If somebody does have a civil rights or hate crime issue that you'd like to bring to our attention, and then just talk again briefly about the kind of the First Amendment implications of any civil rights or hate crime action by our office. So first, we've set up an online complaint portal for anybody who would like to make a report directly to our office. And you can find that at the Rhode Island Attorney General's website, riag.ri.gov, or just Google it, you know, Rhode Island Attorney General's office. There's a tab on the left that says civil rights. You can go there and find the complaint form. And that complaint form goes to a few of us in the office. We will review the complaint form, and depending on the type of case, you know, it'll be reviewed by a number of people, myself, other attorneys in the office who kind of specialize in this work on the civil rights team, and we will determine if there's any action that our office can take. Now, one thing that I do want people to know about the Attorney General's office is we aren't an investigative agency. We're really a prosecutorial office, right? So we work with partners in law enforcement to investigate cases. And so, you know, a really good first stop, if people are comfortable doing so, is to go to local police departments like Richmond and Chief Johnson, to make a police report. And then, you know, if there is a hate crimes or civil rights issue, that's where the Civil Rights and Hate Crimes Liaison Officer comes in, ensuring that the case is appropriately referred to our office for prosecution. So, you know, making sure that in these cases, which ordinarily wouldn't necessarily come to our office because they aren't felonies often, you know, they still do come in, because we really prioritize them and see them as cases that we want to, that we think should be handled by kind of a specialized team in the state. But of course you can come to us directly. Our response may be like, hey, you know, have you gone to the local PD? You know, they're really the ones who are charged with like investigation of most offenses. But we'll certainly circle back with you and discuss any claim that you might have. Now, moving to the law part of it, I don't want to, you know, it's a really complicated area of law. And so just at the outset, by which I mean the First Amendment is a really complicated area of law, I just want to say, like, there's no harm in ever filing a complaint. There's no harm in going to your local police department and filing a, you know, seeing if you can file a police report. There's no harm in filing through our online complaint form or giving us a call. You know, that said, you know, I do want to kind of just let people know a little bit about the legal landscape here, so that people have, you know, expectations set, because it can be really, really confusing and complicated to understand, like, when a case can be brought. So I saw on the agenda, you know, one of the statutes that people wanted to hear about was the cyber stalking and cyber harassment statute in the state, which is 11-52-4.2. So, you know, basically that's all about online cyber stalking and cyber harassment. You know, all laws in this area that are enforced by a state or a local police, a local prosecutor, are going to be subject to, you know, the First Amendment. And so, you know, I think that this is something that I'm sure a lot of people on the call tonight know about, but, you know, I was asked to just briefly touch on it and give you a sense of what the First Amendment landscape is. So, you know, the First Amendment generally applies to government action. So like when a prosecutor is going to bring a case, the First Amendment is going to apply because the goal of the First Amendment is to ensure that the government doesn't inappropriately stifle free speech. So all laws are going to be subject to it, like 11-52-4.2. So whatever you see in the law, kind of behind it, unspoken, is the First Amendment and all of the tests of the First Amendment that we'll go through briefly tonight. So the First Amendment kind of starts out with this assumption that all speech is protected unless it's not. So unless there's an exception to the First Amendment, there's this assumption that all speech is protected, including and actually most importantly, political and ideological speech, as opposed to commercial speech. So the political and ideological speech is going to be subject to, you know, the most rigorous analysis to determine if it's protected or unprotected. Commercial speech, we kind of look at a lower level of what we call scrutiny, because there's less history there of people's of minority opinions and frankly minority views being stifled. So I'm just going to go through quickly the categories of unprotected speech. Those categories are obscenity, defamation, fraud, child pornography, speech integral to criminal conduct. And then, you know, those are kind of, I think, obvious ones that people know about. The three maybe most important ones to discussing the cyberstalking and cyber harassment statute would be true threats, the true threats doctrine. So true threats are unprotected speech. Incitement to a criminal act or incitement is unprotected. And then fighting words are unprotected speech as well. And so just briefly, what are true threats? You know, the famous Supreme Court case here is Virginia v. Black, that held that a true threat is a serious expression of intent to commit an act of unlawful violence to a particular individual or individuals. That's the kind of really quick summary, but it can be really complicated to figure out whether written or spoken words are true threats. And so, for example, if I say to a person, I'm going to kill you, that's clearly a true threat. But obviously I've just said those words, right? And I can't be prosecuted for a threat. You know, you have to figure out obviously what the real true intent of the speaker was and whether a reasonable person would feel threatened under the circumstances. But it's a quite complicated test. And so just want, you know, everyone to be aware of the true threat doctrine in Virginia v. Black. The next incitement, the famous case there is Brandenburg v. Ohio. And what that case held is that the First Amendment text advocating the use of force or law breaking, except where such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. And so the key word there is imminent. And so, you know, the inciting speech has to be really likely to right now produce imminent, you know, right now produce lawless action imminently right now. And so that is another category of unprotected speech. And finally, the last category that I want to go into in a little bit more depth is the fighting words exception. That's from a famous case called Chaplinsky, where a person called a police officer actually a damned fascist and was prosecuted for breach of the peace. The US Supreme Court upheld the prosecution, saying that those were fighting words. They're likely to provoke, in 1942, at the time of this prosecution, likely to provoke the average person's retaliation and thereby cause a breach of the peace. So the fighting words exception has been pared back a little bit over the years, but the basic idea is if we're in person together and you say something to me that is so insulting that the average person would respond in a potentially violent manner, you're not allowed to say those words. Usually not going to apply to online conduct. And there's some confusion over that sometimes because there isn't that ability of the hearer to interact with physically the speaker or communicator. So I guess the key thing to remember is just, look, when we get cases in, we had a case, have a case right now that we're prosecuting from down in Narragansett, where this young woman went into a restaurant, Coast Guard House, and she had her meal and was on her way out, and an African-American family had come in the meantime, and it was in June, so COVID was going on, and the father went into the restaurant to see if he could be seated, if his family could be seated, while his family kind of waited outside, his wife and two minor daughters. And the young woman who was leaving started screaming at him, saying, like, "Get the F out of here, you effing black guy, get the F out of here, go back to where you came from." So he's totally shocked, doesn't really know what's going on, and watches the woman leave the restaurant. He's like, fortunately, that's over. She left. And he watches as she goes up to his 15-year-old daughter and starts screaming the same things in her face. And so the Narragansett police sent that case over to us saying, like, look, can this person be prosecuted for disorderly conduct? It's speech alone, right? So it really isn't an easy answer, right? We need to make sure every time that we bring one of these cases that we are operating on the right side of the First Amendment. And so we did a lot of research and ultimately determined that, those were fighting words, that you can't just insult someone, including with racially charged language, in such a way. If you do, it's unprotected speech. And so, just like that person who called that officer a damn fascist in 1942, you are subject to criminal prosecution if you engage in that sort of speech. But the point is, it took us, a couple days of really researching this to be really certain that we were on the right side of the law here. It can be really complicated, and we take it really seriously. So, bring the cases to us. We're going to do our best to make sure that we prosecute fairly in every case. I can certainly answer any questions that people have. And again, just thanks for inviting us here tonight.
Thank you, Keith, and I'll pass it over to Chief Johnson in just a moment. But I think just, putting that in perspective, I think that's really, really helpful to know, because this, again, as we talked about in the beginning, this is an open meeting, and this is hard work. This is important work, and we want to make sure that this is a safe, productive environment where people feel safe to share their thoughts on what you're here to do. So thank you for that. Before I hand it over to Chief Johnson, are there any questions from task force members or the public? I don't see hands. Lisa?
Hi, thank you so much for that. This is a really important and timely conversation, so we really appreciate you being here. I have two questions that I'm asking on behalf of several members of our Charahoe community. One is around defamation. If you could please expand a little bit on how defamation may be applicable to the cyber world, and if it is. And the second that needs to be answered is around incitement. And that is, does a negative action, or does the threat, or does something have to occur for a charge of incitement to be able to be brought forward? Or is that a lesser of the fighting words, that an accumulation of lesser words leading to an immediate action? Does the action, the danger, have to have occurred for that to be brought to your attention?
Sure. So I'll start with the second one first, because I think that's the area that I know more about. And the answer is no. You know, incitement is just when speech or advocacy is directed at producing imminent lawless action and is likely to produce imminent lawless action. You don't need the action to actually occur. So that's the first thing. In terms of defamation, you know, I'm really not as I don't know quite as much about defamation because we don't handle defamation cases in our office. I can tell you that defamation is another kind of one of these, you know, there are whole law school classes taught just on defamation. The reality is that there are different standards that you're going to apply in defamation, depending on whether you're dealing with speech about a private person or about a public person. And so figuring out who's a private person, who's a public person, and then what standard is going to apply can be pretty complicated. You also might have to prove like certain injuries from the speech, but you might not, depending on exactly what was said. Injuries meaning you ordinarily economic harm. But in our office, you know, we don't prosecute defamation claims. Defamation is going to be, you know, something, a private cause of action, something that a person would ordinarily like hire an attorney or at least retain an attorney to advise them on. And so, you know, in Rhode Island, what I would ordinarily counsel people to do if they came to us with a defamation related complaint is, you know, there's the attorney bar referral service that you can find online where, you know, they'll refer you to a private attorney. We aren't able to refer people to private attorneys because we don't want there to be like a conflict of interest or even the appearance of a conflict of interest in referring you to one of our friends. But you can certainly also contact like a nonprofit law firm like the Rhode Island Center for Justice, and they could potentially counsel you or also provide maybe a more helpful referral to you about a defamation related claim. Does that answer your questions?
Thank you, very helpful. So I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to hand it over to Chief Johnson from the Richmond Police Department. So over to you.
Keith, you don't have to show me a law degree. I pretty much get that you have one. I'm glad you went first. I just wanted to start off with a couple of things. For those that don't know me, I know a lot of people on this call. I'm the chief of police of the town of Richmond. I have been there now for 10 years. Prior to that, I was a member of the Rhode Island State Police. I retired a day before I started as the chief, so I really didn't take much of a break. And I have had an intense education in law enforcement and relations with citizens and citizen concerns and citizen complaints and felony arrests and criminality and assessing criminality. But before all of that, I graduated from Cheraho in 1984. And I care very much about the school, the students, the staff, and the people that live in the community. It is a great place to work because people genuinely, if you have a rapport with them and you earn their trust, they entrust you with their safety and their thoughts and communicate well. And that's really what it's all about. Every single person on this call, regardless of your age or background or role in life, you have unique experiences no one else in this call has. And that is the truth. Regardless of what you do for a living or where you live or what your gender or race is, you have unique experiences even to your own peer groups. And sometimes those experiences are unsettling and sometimes they're great. When they're unsettling and it's generated because of social media, which has been a unique phenomena. I can tell you that in police work nationwide, but especially in our community, we see it firsthand. Anxiety is very high for a lot of different reasons. Civil unrest, a pandemic that is still causing people to get ill, and people scrambling to get vaccinations, and disagreements about whether it's a real pandemic or it's not a pandemic. And I really believe people can agree to disagree. That's the way it's supposed to be. And you have ideas that I may not agree with, but I respect your opinion, to share those as long as they don't infringe on my rights or put somebody else in harm's way. And it comes down, it's really that simple. It's not that simple when you're trying to assess criminality, because you're trying to substantiate circumstances that make it clearly criminal rather than a civil wrong, and like a civil tort where you're looking at libel or slander. You know, I'm hinting around a topic that probably prompted us to be here, but it does go towards public commentary. And listen, someone doesn't have to threaten you to make you uncomfortable. If they're having a dialogue and you don't know these people, whoever they are, and your name comes up in a negative light or attached to a mischaracterization of what you actually are involved in, it's hurtful. And it's not criminal that I've seen so far, but it doesn't mean it doesn't bother somebody. If you take nothing else away from my being here tonight, I want you to know, regardless of who you are or what your opinion is, if you have concerns about your safety, you can call us. That's what we're there for. We're not going to embarrass you. We're not going to tell you that you don't have any legitimate complaint, get out of here. That's not reality, and that's not how it should be. When you have been either subjected to any type of treatment, whether it's bullying behavior or you just feel bothered by something and you don't know who to talk to, you can call me. You can leave a voicemail for me. You can email me. There is a school resource officer on campus. His name is Brock Taylor. If you're a student, he is a great person. He cares about the community in the school. He cares about the students. He's established a great rapport with a lot of students there. But I also understand there's 3,000 people on campus at any given time. And sometimes you don't want to be affiliated with a police officer if there's a group of people that have already name called or excluded you from a group, and you're worried about being made to feel further excluded. So there's discrete ways of having conversations, and be persistent. If there's someone on this call that happens to be a mentor to you in the school system that you are comfortable talking to, have them put you in touch with Brock or myself or somebody else if you want to. The main thing is don't harbor or bury those feelings if they're really problematic, because you can't really learn. And that's what school is really all about. It's an educational experience. It's a shared educational experience. It's hard to learn if you don't feel safe. It's hard to learn if you feel like your thoughts aren't welcome. That doesn't mean you can speak out anytime you want in class. Believe me, I tried it and it was ineffective back then, and I guarantee it probably hasn't changed much now. Being respectful of other people. And if you step on somebody's toes, because, you know, I have a sense of humor, and sometimes I say things that I think are funny, and when they're not funny to one particular person, the right thing to do is to apologize. People will get along a lot better. And I feel like I'm having kind of a silly conversation, but that's the gist of this whole thing, is discomfort that might not be criminal, but it still impacts you in your daily existence there on campus or outside of school. So I had mentioned the cyber stalking statute to the superintendent when we first started talking about some things that surfaced online, and just to show that there are elements in here that have to be established through facts, and if those facts aren't present, then that particular statute there's no criminal violation. That doesn't mean that we can't have conversations with people. I guess I'll just leave it at that. If there's anybody that has any questions of me, feel free to ask. But my ultimate goal for being here was for everybody to see me and hear me at one time and know that your police department is there to serve you. It's not the other way around.
Thank you, Chief Johnson, and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for you in the department's investment in making sure that the safety and well-being of everybody who coexists in our community is first and foremost the most priority. So thank you. I don't know if anybody has Questions for Chief Johnson or for Keith Hoffman? I'm not seeing hands, but would not be the first time I miss.
Don't ask me my algebra scores from 1983.
That's off limits.
That is, I'm not prepared to share that. That's painful.
No worries. Well, I would just like to say thank you both for taking the time for being here. I think this is really helpful for our members of the community and for the members of our task force so that we can move forward in a safe and productive way. So thank you both.
Thank you both so much. And
Thank
Dan,
you.
John Anderson's not back on the call, so if it's up to the task force to move back and make a motion to move back to the OMA item.
Oh,
So
sure.
moved.
Yep.
So moved.
Thank you, Joe. Can I have a second to move back to item 3?
Second.
Thank you, Carla. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstention or any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, motion carries. Okay, the floor is yours, John. We are on item number 3, review and discussion of the Open Meetings Act.
Great, thank you very much. My name is John Anderson. I am the attorney for the Charahoe Regional School District. I have been the attorney now for about 13 years. The superintendent asked me tonight to address the Rhode Island Open Meetings Act and to make sure that everybody understood and so that everybody would be operating on the same page. And I think it's very fitting that I am item number 3 on the agenda because I'm going to talk about 3 parts of the act that affect you the most. The first part of the act that affects you is having an agenda. And an agenda is what you tell the public at least 2 business days prior to the meeting that you will be discussing at the meeting. What type of things should go on the agenda, what you want to discuss. You need to be, however, specific. When you're preparing your agenda, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the public. And you have to look at it from the public's perspective as to whether a member of the public would understand that a topic was being discussed or not being discussed. So for example, somebody suggested at a prior meeting, we should talk about current events. Unfortunately, current events is just way too broad. Are we talking about a trial in Minneapolis? Are we talking about the Red Sox? Are we talking about voting rights in Georgia? It's just a very overbroad topic. If the task force wishes to talk about a trial in Minnesota or the Red Sox or of voting laws in Georgia, the task force can do that, but the task force has to be specific as to what it plans to talk about. And again, specific is determined from not your view, but from the view of the public. Think about it as guardrails. The agenda is the guardrails that the task force or the school committee or any other public board in Rhode Island operates within. The second topic or the second part of the Open Meetings Act that I'd like to discuss is the conduct of the meeting. I just talked about how there are guardrails. Once you establish those guardrails by publishing notice of your meeting 48 hours, 2 business days in advance on the school district website, in 2 public buildings, once you set those guardrails, you have to stay in those guardrails. So while it may be very interesting and you want to talk about something that happened, you know, the task force would like to talk tonight about what the budget vote yesterday. If it's not on the agenda, you can't discuss it. It's as simple as that. The third topic that I want to talk about is quorums. Quorums are when a majority of you get together to discuss a topic. Obviously, if you post the agenda 2 business days in advance in various public places and on the school district website and the Secretary of State's website, and then you have a meeting and you discuss it, you're good. Unfortunately, however, from time to time, members of public boards will have quorums talk informally. After the meeting, it doesn't happen very much with COVID, but before COVID, after the meeting, everybody decides, let's all go and stop at, and have a little social afterwards. And a majority of the board goes to that little social afterward and then keeps discussing what happened at the meeting. That's a quorum. And since it wasn't advertised 2 business days in advance on your agenda, you've just violated the open meetings law because you're having a meeting at the bar where you're talking about everything after the meeting that is the public's business. You also can create a rolling quorum. And a rolling quorum is think of the game of telephone when you were all growing up. And let's assume, and I'm just going to pick people off the screen. Mr. Reddish has a great idea. And Mr. Reddish wants to start talking about something that is in the purview of the Anti-Racism Task Force. He thinks that we should have a particular activity. He calls Mr. Lopes. Mr. Lopes calls Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald thinks it's a great idea, and he calls Ms. Spears. And then Ms. Spears thinks, well, I'll call Ms. Fee and see what she thinks about that idea. Pretty soon, we have a majority of the members of the task force who are talking about the public business, but there's no agenda that has been published, and the public is not able to participate in that conversation. Another way that often happens is the function of reply to all on the internet. Just like you can't have a meeting in a bar after you finish your regular meeting, just like you can't play the game of telephone to conduct business, boards also get in trouble with the reply to all function, because essentially what they start doing, and I saw it with a board earlier today, that essentially it becomes a meeting on the internet where Ms. Spears sends an email to Ms. Fee. Ms. Fee then hits reply to all. Mr. Fitzgerald responds by hitting reply to all. And pretty soon there is a very lively conversation going on with regard to task force business that is being done outside the public purview. Again, you can't do that. That's a violation of the Open Meetings Act. The Open Meetings Act is enforced by the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office is empowered in the case of willful or intentional violations to seek fines through the Superior Court. In addition to that, the Attorney General can ask the court to overturn a decision, in other words, to nullify an action of a board. Finally, it's frankly a lot of bad press that detracts from whatever else that you as a body are trying to accomplish. So I think, the superintendent asked me to speak to you tonight to, again, tell you where those guardrails are, starting with the agenda, how you conduct your meetings, and don't, unwittingly create quorums through emails or social events outside of your public meetings. Does anybody have any questions for me tonight?
So John, one of the things I think it would be helpful is oftentimes when there gets to be discussion and public comment, and oftentimes someone can take then the thread, right, and it maybe starts on track and then moves off track. And I think it would help the task force to know, what's their role when that happens.
Sure. it is perfectly appropriate for you to have on your agenda an item called public comment. And the public can speak on public comment on anything they want, because the public is not a member of the task force. So if the public wishes to speak about the Red Sox, a trial in Minneapolis, voting rights in Georgia, the public can do that. But as members of the task force, the only thing that you can do is say, that's interesting. We'll put it on our next public agenda so that everyone will know about the topic that we're talking about. You can't use the public comment period as a way to get around having it on your agenda 2 business days prior to the meeting.
Thank you. And I think, and I appreciate you coming here, John. I think I know you came, I think, early on in one of our first meetings, and you know, we've had a wide range of people joining us since then, and we obviously have important work to do. We want to make sure we're doing it right, and we're getting, you know, we're crossing all of our T's, dotting our I's. So I appreciate that, and that's really helpful, especially as we discuss potential future agenda items and move along in our agenda. So thank you. Does anybody have any other questions for John before we move forward? Okay, well, thank you for your time, John. So I believe we need a motion to move forward on the agenda to, let's see, we already did our debriefs about our work groups. Can I have a motion to move forward to item 7?
So move.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Carla. All those in favor? Great. Any opposed? Any abstained? Great, motion carries. Okay, and now we're moving forward with the agenda as written. So this item 7 says begin discussion and drafting of terms and definitions for the district for school committee approval and posting on the website. So I think that full piece there is obviously intentional. So everything that's said tonight does not mean that is what's going to be up there. Obviously, this is what our recommendation would be to the school committee, so it can be posted on the website. This came up at our last meeting to make sure that we're operating off of shared definitions. And it also came up as feedback from the school committee at our last meeting when we were doing their report outs as well. So am I handing that over to you, Gina, to start that conversation?
Not me. I would say that the terms, I think Lisa brought up 2 at one meeting, one being anti-racism. And I apologize, I cannot think of the other one, but basically, if the task force is going to use terminology before it's presented, it should be approved. So you want to make sure that we have a shared definition.
So I know Jess is our secretary, so I know you're feverishly taking notes on everything. And of course, this is recorded so we can look back. I know some members of the task force sent an email over to Maya with a few items. So I have a short list. So can I read off what's on the short list and then open it up for task force members to suggest additional words? Does that sound good? Okay. So yep, BIPOC, racism, diversity, equity, equality, inclusion, justice, colonization, decolonization. Any other task force members have additional words they would like for us to create definitions?
I think we should add in their definitions of implicit and explicit bias.
Great.
I'd also add marginalized.
Thank you. Any other?
I would say, just for documentation, say the acronym, our acronym ARTF.
Perfect.
I would also probably think that we should add what we think of as the task force is what community is, so that there's a common understanding of community,
Mhm.
at least from the eyes of diversity.
And I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of our tribal members here, but maybe it would be helpful to define what we mean by, indigenous peoples and tribal people. You can veto me.
I see. Indonis, were you jumping in?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I agree.
Thank you. I know another in some report outs, we've had questions on tribal sovereignty, so perhaps that would be a good definition to include.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Dan, I think at some point we need to include, as we bring our reports forward, where we referenced from at some point in time. So, our data points, where they come from, so that there's a history.
Great. Let's see, any other? Lisa?
I think that we need to include microaggression. Although that is an evolving term, to consider racial trauma, because there's kind of a range there. I'd like members of the Anti-Racism Task Force to, if you could just have a conversation around whether or not we should include some thoughts and definitions around land acknowledgements. If that's something we want to go forward with, we wouldn't be able to discuss it if we haven't predefined it.
I think that's helpful. Yep. We've talked about that in the policy working group.
Oh, good.
So that fits.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
That's a go. And in terms of when you present to the school committee, examples, I think are a really good teaching tool. So a definition and then an example would be helpful as well, because the school committee themselves, may want some context for what these things mean. Thank you.
Like that. Katie?
Excuse me, I'm wondering if in the context of our suggestions at the practices meeting, if regalia would be an important concept to define based on a suggestion.
For sure. One thing kind of to Joe's point about data or where it's coming, I think some of the framing about being data driven, some of that is like obviously looking at the data that the school hands us, numbers, but also some of that is operating off of, science related to like social determinants of health, health equity. So understanding some of those concepts. And I would also add in adverse childhood experiences. There's a large body of science there, and racial trauma is a recognized adverse childhood experience. Hold on, I cannot write and talk. Health equity, ACEs. Let me see. Am I able to, Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, am I able to call on members of the public?
I believe we can.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, because you have a public comment section coming up, I think, right after this.
So yeah, Wendy. Oh, hold on, you just muted.
I don't know if I can add this in, but generational trauma, historical trauma.
Thank you. Any other
You have a hand from Donna.
suggestion.
Yeah, as simple as it is, I would like to define social justice and
Very helpful. Yeah.
possibly white privilege, which is a term that's being used a lot now. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Thon?
And I think one with what Donna said, privilege as a whole, because privilege can look many different ways. And I don't think anyone said institutionalized.
Great one. Yep. Katie?
And connected with institutionalized, I wonder about structural violence, although I will take a veto of that term if so suggested, but also white. I know white privilege is suggested, but also whiteness.
Mm-hmm. Thon, is your hand up again, or is that the same one?
That's the same one. I don't know how to
No
put
worries.
it down. Sorry.
I can lower it. No worries. Caleb.
Thank you. Yeah, just in terms of Katie's suggestion to try and not stir a strong reaction, we could do structural inclusion or structural exclusion, things like that. And I'll leave it to the board to decide. But I know I've been trying to work in the community and calm some fears about what the intent of the task force is. And I think structural violence might trigger a sense of reaction that I don't think it's intended to communicate, but could be seen as agenda driven, you know?
Sure. Thank you for that suggestion. So
Yeah.
I have those all kind of as sub pieces there for us to flesh out. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa?
So Dan, I actually have in my notes, and I didn't say anything because it was Donna's, but at the school committee meeting, Donna Chambers had recommended that the anti-racism task force look at Georgetown University's their glossary of terms under their anti-racism toolkit. So that, looking back at my notes from that meeting, I suggest that the anti-racism task force as a whole, when you come together to do this work, to go ahead and look at that. And it's an easy Google, because rather than continuing to say things like intersectionality and what it means to be an ally, I mean, it really is a fantastic resource, and has definitions and then has the origins of those definitions. So I strongly recommend you take her up on that recommendation. It's an excellent resource.
That's really helpful. I know, and there was also another, I cannot remember who sent it forward, but from the Community Anti-Racist Education Initiative, they had different, I think specifically around education, some different terms and ideas there. So I'll add that. I haven't looked at that tool, but it may be helpful. Wendy, did I see your hand, or was that answered? No. Virginia.
Hi, thank you, Dan. In the healthcare world, we use the term lateral violence. I don't know if that is the same as structural violence. So
That's helpful. I'm going to add that all in the same section so we can look at that, and perhaps that's all in the same section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't think I'm missing any other thoughts there. Clifford?
I'm not sure if I missed this one, but maybe systemic, in the sense of we're hearing that word a lot lately with systemic racism, and
for sure,
I think it'd be useful to define it. So, and especially in the context.
Yep, I don't think we've mentioned that so far, so I'll add that. Thank you. Any other thoughts there? So my question, I don't know if John is still on, or if Superintendent Picard, if you're able to answer this. So making sure that we're not getting into the territory of rolling quorum and any of that. I think looking at Maya and I as chair and vice chair can certainly take stab at this, but is there a process to make sure that we can get input from the task force, but making sure we do so where we're not, I think you understand where I'm going with that, but yeah.
One of the things I suggest is you post, so you can post it as a work session, where it's not officially a meeting, but it's more of a work group where you're talking it through, and but you post that, right? So that it's
Okay.
clear what the work is going to be, especially if it's going to be a majority or even half the members. So this way it's public, it's transparent, but that would be my recommendation. And of course you would let us know, we would help you and we would post that for you.
Okay, that's helpful.
Coordinate the dates to make sure. The other option could be that you look at the 3 subcommittees and sort of tier out
Assign them.
and then work within those work groups. But I know we're getting clarification too, to make sure, our goal is to make sure that our community and all of you know it's transparent and that we're working with one another and not, not.
And we want the buy-in. So we want to do it in this form, but we also want to make sure we can move this work forward.
So those are 2 options.
Okay, that's really helpful. So I'll make sure I circle back with Maya and discuss next steps on that. Katie, I saw your hand.
I was just going to mention that there's the great resource of Georgetown that was suggested, but there's also an open textbook network, which I am part of, for these free and accessible resources and open free textbooks. I wonder if there might be a textbook on such a topic that would have a glossary that would be useful for adopting terms.
Very helpful.
As another possibility. It's at University of Minnesota.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think, as no matter how we go about making all this happen, I think looking at, how these terms, we're not going to be, from scratch writing definitions, but looking to where these have existed elsewhere. So that's really helpful. Great. So I'm not seeing any other hands up for that. So let me open back up the agenda. So the next piece here is perfect. So public comment on agenda items. So I know so far, just a quick review. We approved the minutes. John talked about the review of the Open Meetings Act. We had Chief Johnson in the Attorney General's office, Keith, talk about concerns of safety, cyberstalking, and harassment. We had the report from Lisa on student and staff demographics. We heard the debrief and feedback from the school committee on policies and practices. And then we just talked about terms. So any thoughts there? I see Donna, your hand.
I'm wondering, on the school committee, it's public comments on items that are not on the agenda as opposed to on the agenda. What is the intention here, Dan?
That is a really good question. I think, and I think I even just learned a little more too when John talked about that during public comment, the public is able to say something that's not on the agenda. We as task force members just can't have that conversation. So I think public comment then would be for anything in general. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gina.
And I want to speak for Joe, because I know this was an item that he requested, but I think it was because to make sure it was clear that the public could comment on the discussion of the items on the agenda.
Okay.
Not to avoid them. Do you see what I'm saying, Donna?
Yeah.
But I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that was the intent.
I just wanted clarity on that. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I think maybe perhaps as we're making our agenda for May, we make sure that's clear. But yeah, no, that's really helpful. So any public comment? I'm not seeing any. Oh, Wendy?
So I came on tonight because I went to Cheraho, graduated at 79. I live in Exeter, so I don't even know that I should be here, but I'm interested always. I grew up in Charleston, what is going on in my community. And when I read things on Facebook, I'm like, what? So that's why I'm here. I don't know if that's illegal or not. I think, you know, sometimes it's bigger than just Cherahoe. I work in East Providence, Central Falls, and Pawtucket as a social worker with families. So I see a lot of stuff down here that's different than up there. Only, you know, it's a 45-minute ride, but it's still mighty different. So I hope that I'm invited back, just because I wanna learn more. And I wanna know, I have a question too. I'm involved with, because I'm an outreach social worker. Is there a health equity zone in South County? HEZ?
I know we can't go off of,
Oh, sorry.
yes, there is.
Okay.
So we could most certainly add that to a future agenda regarding Healthy Bodies, Healthy Minds, which is the local health equity zone. And as far as your first piece, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I think public means public. So you don't have to have an address in our 3 towns. Thank you for being here.
Okay.
And I hope that's not incorrect. I'm not seeing anybody vigorously shaking. Okay. Clifford.
I joined tonight because I've heard that, you know, there's a lot of, you know, talk in the community, or some loud talk in the community. And I just wanted the task force to know that there are a lot of community members out there that are really happy that you guys are doing what you're doing, and realize that when you put yourself in a position like this, you open yourself up to criticism and things like that. And, you know, just know there's a lot of people out there that support what you're doing, and it's really meaningful and important to a lot of us in the community. So keep it up, and stay strong, and, you know, reach out to your community members if you need further support.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comment? Yeah, Nicole.
This question is for Chief Johnson or Keith, but what's the definition of slander? Is that different from defamation, or?
It's a 50-50 shot. Libel, I think, is written and slander is spoken, but I will defer to Keith because he's got a law degree and I don't.
Is Keith still with us? I'm trying to look.
His images.
I think he's there in spirit right now.
Well, we can you know, speaking of definitions, so I just added that to the list of potential definitions to look at. I'm not sure if that'll make it in the final ones, but thank you for that question. Any other public comment before we move on? Yeah, Nicole.
Sorry, I was just thinking about definitions, maybe like harassment or target, like defining what those are, or bullying. Yeah, maybe.
And I would, we do have definitions in our school district, so I would want to make sure that we align, or if there's a change that we'd have to do both.
That's helpful too, Gina, because I know the policy work group has some potential recommendations around handbook. So I think it's important to start where are we, and then if there is, you know, something that would be different, that would then obviously be a recommendation to the school committee. But that's helpful. I'm going to asterisk that. Great. Well, I am not seeing any virtual hands raised or physical hands raised. I apologize if I'm missing anybody. So the next piece on the agenda is possible future agenda items. So I'll start with one. This was put forward by Dartula, anti-racism task force member, unable to be here tonight, but she shared this. Her recommendation for a potential future agenda item would be to invite an organizational content expert. She provided a couple examples such as Restore More or CLE to discuss what they could provide to the Anti-Racism Task Force related to evidence-based approaches for student-focused work specific to school districts related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Well thought out there in her recommendation. Any other potential future agenda items? Katie? Oops,
I don't think it's adding an agenda item, but I'm wondering if going off of what Dartula has said, I would be interested as well to know the nonprofit landscape in the state that may be connected to this work.
And then did I see Joe?
Yeah, I was gonna say we may want to adjust the one agenda item from public comment on agenda items to public comment. That way we can get, any feedback from the public on any other things that we should be paying attention to. Or whatever thoughts that they may have.
Great. See, Wendy?
The Nonviolence Institute. They do a lot of work around this nonprofit. And the something Justice Institute. Someone help me.
Since
Rhode Island
we
Commission on Prejudice and Bias, maybe?
Yeah. Thank you, Chief.
Perfect, thank you. Any other future agenda items folks would like to? Oh, sorry, Katie.
Was it also mentioned something about health equity zone, or am I misspeaking?
Oh, sure.
Dan, just to clarify, we would need the curriculum team to be able to do their update prior to their school committee session, which I think is in May, the first meeting in May. And I know it's the next agenda item, but typically we do it for our meetings the first Wednesday in May, at the task force, so.
And yeah, so to make sure, because just like the policy and practices group has done in the past, that for the curricula working group to give their draft report out before it goes live to the school committee. Sure, thank you. Wendy?
I want to piggyback on what Katie just said about the HES, the health equity zone. I was just questioning that because I sit on two of those because I work for a nonprofit, and they do a lot of inclusion work. And I didn't know if the one down here did. So if nobody's interested in that, that's fine.
Right now I have it under, well, and I'm sure Jess has it better in the minutes, but all these recommendations will go to the superintendent and legal counsel to see if they make sense to be on the agenda. But I think that would be kind of categorized in that nonprofit landscape that's connected to this work. But thank you. Any other? I don't see any virtual or real life waving hands. So that is the end of our agenda. I would just call for a motion to adjourn our meeting.
Sorry, Dan, did
Oh,
we,
yep.
was it in passing talking about our next meeting date? Was
Oh,
that
I'm
what
sorry,
Gina
yeah.
was just referring to? Sorry.
Just skipping on through, sorry. Yeah, so we normally completely ignored that cue. I'm sorry, Gina. So we have historically been meeting the first Wednesday of the month. So for our next meeting date, would we be looking at May 5th? Does that work for task force members? See some heads nodding. Does that not work for task force members? So, okay, I think it makes sense for us to continue with our with that schedule. Wonderful, thank you. Is there anything else I missed, Gina, before we adjourn this? No, okay, wonderful.
Nice job, Dan.
Thank you all for bearing with me. I'm sure Maya will be with us next time. So, well, great. Well, can I have a motion to adjourn?
A motion.
Great, thank you, Jess. A second. I see
Second.
Heidi's hand and Carla. Great. And all those in favor? Any opposed? Any? Okay, wonderful. And we adjourn at 8.